My brother burned down my workshop after I refused to give him 50%. Now he's in prison, and I used his $250,000 share from the family house sale to rebuild bigger. Growing up, it was impossible not to notice the difference in how my parents treated my younger brother, Ryan, and me. It wasn't that they were outright cruel, but it was always clear that Ryan was their golden child. My name is Daniel. I'm 30 years old now, but I'll never forget what it felt like back then, being the overlooked, invisible one in the family. I've always been the responsible one, the one who quietly did what was expected of him without asking for praise. It wasn't until I was older that I realized how much that actually hurt. The year I won a silver medal at the state science competition, I was thrilled. I thought, surely this time, my parents would be proud. They'd see that I wasn't just the quiet one, that I was good at something too. But no. Instead, Ryan made the junior varsity soccer team that same year. That was all anyone could talk about. I remember my mom beaming when she heard the news, her eyes glowing with pride as she looked at him. "You're going to be a star, Ryan," she said. It stung, but I told myself I was being petty. After all, it wasn't about me. It was about Ryan. "Congratulations, Ryan," my dad added, ruffling his hair. He barely glanced my way, even though I was sitting there, waiting to be acknowledged. That was how it always went. I got used to it after a while, lowering my expectations from my parents, protecting myself from the disappointment by simply not expecting anything from them. I could only manage the emotional survival by keeping a distance, emotionally and physically. If I didn't care, I wouldn't get hurt. One of the only people who seemed to notice me, who showed any real interest in who I was my grandfather. He was a retired Navy engineer who didn't talk much about feelings, but somehow managed to make me feel seen. When I'd hit a roadblock in school or at home, he'd quietly offer encouragement. "Keep your head up, Daniel," he'd say, his voice soft but steady. And every once in a while, when I was really struggling, he'd slip me a few extra bills in my pocket, never making it feel like charity. It was his way of saying, "I see you." I remember one day, when I was about 15, sitting in his garage, watching him work on an old wooden shelf that needed repair. I had been feeling especially down about the lack of recognition I got from my parents. Ryan had just won some school award for best athlete, and, again, all attention was on him. "You know," my grandfather said as he slid the hammer back into its place, "the world's going to try to tell you that you're not important. But it's not about what they think. It's about what you make of yourself." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. But now I get it. He wasn't just talking about the world out there. He was talking about the family I was stuck in. I was never going to get their approval. So, I needed to figure out how to live without it. Looking back, I can see how my relationship with Ryan started to shift, too. I'd like to say it was all in my head, that it was just normal sibling rivalry, but I started to feel something else, resentment. Not toward Ryan, but toward the way my parents treated him like some sort of golden child. No matter what I did, he would always be the favorite. And, more importantly, I would always be the one left trying to make them proud. Even at that young age, I started to realize how my value in the family wasn't measured by my actions or accomplishments, but by their perception of who was worth celebrating. Ryan fit the mold. He was popular, athletic, and confident. I was the one who took care of business, kept my head down, and stayed out of the spotlight. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right, but I learned to live with it. At least, that's what I told myself. Back then, I just wanted to be enough for them. My grandfather passed away when I was 25. He had always been there for me, quiet, steady, like the lighthouse in a storm, and suddenly, he was gone. It felt like the last solid foundation in my life had crumbled beneath my feet. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part came a couple of weeks later, when we read his will. My parents and I sat in that sterile, cold lawyer's office, the air thick with tension. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with a face that had seen too many wills, shuffled papers in front of us as he spoke in a monotone voice. "Daniel, Ryan, your grandfather's estate is being divided evenly. You each receive $200,000. The remaining $100,000 will go to your parents." At first, I felt a surge of relief. The financial security I had dreamed of for years was finally mine. But then the lawyer dropped the bombshell that would change everything. "However," he continued, his voice hesitant, "your grandfather explicitly stated in his will that this division was based on your parents' treatment of Ryan. The intention behind this is to provide support for Ryan, who has been consistently favored, as per your grandfather's wishes." I turned to look at my parents. My mom's lips were pressed tightly together, and my dad had his eyes cast down, avoiding mine. The weight of what the lawyer had said hit me hard, and I could feel the anger swelling in my chest. My grandfather had seen it all. He had known how I was treated, and he'd still chosen to split the inheritance that way. Ryan, sitting next to me, seemed unaware of the weight of the moment. He looked at the lawyer with that familiar smirk, his eyes gleaming with entitlement. "Thanks, Grandpa," he muttered under his breath, already thinking of ways to spend the money. I, on the other hand, sat in stunned silence, trying to process what was happening. My grandfather had wanted me to have a chance, to have something that could help me start fresh, but this felt like one final slap. The idea that Ryan had been consistently favored seemed so casual, like it was just another fact of life. But then, in the middle of all the anger and disbelief, something clicked. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. If the money was meant to be mine to do with as I pleased, if my grandfather trusted me to do something with it, I wouldn't let it be for nothing. 2 weeks later, I made a decision. I wasn't going to waste this chance. I was going to build something that would be mine, something that could stand on its own. I moved to Kansas City and opened a car restoration workshop. It wasn't the kind of place that would attract the high-end clientele that Ryan might have attracted, but it was real, it was tangible, and it was mine. I used part of the inheritance to buy the tools and equipment I needed. The rest went into hiring a mechanic, Miguel, a guy I had met in town who was as passionate about cars as I was. He wasn't just a mechanic, he was a partner. Together, we poured everything we had into the shop, working late nights, building custom car parts, restoring classic vehicles, and eventually, attracting a steady stream of clients. The workshop took off faster than I had expected. We even got some positive press coverage from a local news station, and the business began growing. It felt like the first real achievement I had under my belt that wasn't about meeting some arbitrary expectation set by my family. I was finally making something of myself on my own terms. But Ryan, on the other hand, was burning through his inheritance. As I made calculated investments in my future, Ryan bought luxury cars, threw wild parties, and racked up bad investments. It wasn't a surprise to anyone who knew him, but it still stung. One night, he called me, slurring his words. "Hey, Dan, I need a loan. I bought this sick car, and I'm short on cash. Can you help?" I laughed bitterly, remembering how he had spent the money so recklessly. "Ryan, I'm not your bank," I told him flatly. "Get your finances together. I'm not bailing you out." He didn't take it well, but I wasn't backing down. I had worked hard for what I had, and I wasn't about to let him waste everything our grandfather had left behind. It was time for Ryan to figure things out on his own. But I had to admit, I wasn't expecting the bitterness to grow between us the way it did. As my workshop grew, so did the tension between Ryan and me. He was unraveling, and I was beginning to see that no matter what I did, no matter how successful I became, I was never going to be able to change the way our parents saw me. To them, Ryan was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And to Ryan, I would always be the one left in the shadow. But the money, the workshop, the success, it felt good. For the first time in my life, I was in control. It didn't matter what they thought anymore. I was finally building my future. It was a Sunday afternoon when I got the call. My mother, sounding unusually frantic, told me that there was a family meeting at my parents' house. She insisted it was important, but wouldn't tell me why. I knew something was off, but I agreed to go anyway, hoping it was just another one of those let's all get together moments. The kind where we all sit awkwardly at the dinner table, forcing small talk about my dad's golf game or the weather. When I arrived, I could feel the tension in the air the moment I stepped through the door. My mom was at the kitchen counter, looking frazzled. My dad was sitting in his chair, distant as always, staring at the television without really watching it. And Ryan, of course, was there, sitting on the couch, looking smug and impatient. "Hey Dan, glad you could make it," Ryan said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I didn't even bother replying. I knew what was coming. "Daniel," my mother began, her voice tight. "We've all been talking, and we think it's time for you to make things right with your brother." I looked at her, confused. "Make things right? What do you mean?" "Ryan's been through a lot lately," she continued, avoiding eye contact. "He's trying to get his life back together, but he needs your help." Ryan shifted on the couch, finally speaking up. "Look, I'm not asking for a handout, but I could really use some help with the business. Chloe, my girlfriend, is pregnant, and I'm going to need extra support. It's a lot of responsibility, man. You get it?" Pregnant? I barely knew the girl, and yet here I was, listening to Ryan talk as if he'd suddenly become some responsible family man. But it wasn't just the pregnancy that set my nerves on edge. It was the way he was talking about my workshop. His eyes kept flicking to me, calculating. My chest tightened as I realized what was happening. "I'm not giving you money for a kid you didn't plan for," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I'm definitely not giving you half of my business just because you need help. You've spent your entire inheritance on things that won't last, and now you want me to bail you out?" Ryan's face darkened. "It's not like that, Daniel. This is family we're talking about. I'm trying to make a fresh start, but I can't do it alone. I need you to be a man about this and help out." I shook my head, incredulous. We don't need your attitude, your business, or your stubbornness. My heart hammered in my chest. I looked at my mother, hoping for some sign of support, but she was just standing there, silent. Ryan stood smugly, watching as the scene unfolded. Go ahead and leave, Daniel. It's your choice, he said, voice dripping with satisfaction. I didn't say anything. I turned, grabbed my coat, and walked out, leaving my parents and Ryan behind. As I slammed the door, I felt something inside me snap. I had been trying for years to earn their love, to prove I was worthy. And this was what I got. That night, I blocked all of them, my parents, Ryan, on my phone. I knew that cutting ties with them meant I was done with that version of my life. The family I had fought so hard for wasn't worth the sacrifice anymore. They could have their golden child. I was going to build something on my own, and this time, I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. I didn't hear from my parents or Ryan for a while after the intervention. Days turned into weeks, and I thought maybe things would cool off. I threw myself into the workshop. Work was the only thing that kept me from spiraling. Miguel and I were working on a custom restoration for a classic 1969 Mustang, and the press had been giving us some great coverage, which was helping business even more. But of course, Ryan wouldn't stay quiet for long. One evening, about a month after the blow-up at my parents' house, I was in the back of the workshop, tightening some bolts under a car hood. The place was bustling. Miguel was working on a client's car, and the staff was fixing up the shop for the next day's appointments. Everything was going smoothly. That was until I heard the door to the workshop slam open. I straightened up, wiping my hands on a rag, and turning to see Ryan standing in the doorway. He was wearing a jacket that looked way too nice for someone who hadn't lifted a finger to get where he was, and his face was flushed with something between rage and entitlement. My stomach twisted. Ryan, I said coolly, turning back to the car, trying to ignore the prickling sensation running down my spine. What the hell are you doing here? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a few slow steps into the workshop, looking around as if he was surveying his domain. I want my share of the business, he finally spat, his voice low but edged with a dangerous tone. You know, the one you promised me? I stood up straight, wiping off my hands. I didn't promise you anything, Ryan. You think you can just show up here and take what's mine? I stepped toward him, my jaw clenching. You're out of your mind. He sneered at me. You think this place means anything without me? Without family? You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for our grandfather's will, and now you're acting like you built it all yourself? You owe me, Daniel. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. You've done nothing but screw up everything that's been handed to you. You don't get a piece of my business, Ryan. It's over. Ryan's expression twisted, and I could see the shift in his eyes, like something finally clicked in his brain. Fine, he muttered under his breath. You want to play it this way? Let's see how tough you really are. He suddenly lunged at me, shoving me back into one of the workbenches. I stumbled, but caught myself before I hit the ground. His hands were on me, pushing, shoving, like a madman trying to make a point. My mind raced, the room spinning for a split second, and all I could think was that this was my brother. This was family, but the words didn't mean anything anymore. I pushed him back hard, sending him stumbling into a stack of tools. What the hell is wrong with you? I shouted, my pulse racing. You're acting like a goddamn child. Ryan got up, wiping his mouth, his face red with anger. I should have had what you have, Daniel. All this crap you've worked for, it's mine too. You can't just take it from me. If I can't have it, then neither can you. Before I could react, he swung at me. His fist hit my jaw, the sharp sting spreading across my face. I staggered back, my head spinning, but I didn't fall. My own anger surged, and I lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar and shoving him into the wall. You want to fight me? I growled, my voice a low, threatening hiss. You want to tear everything down just because you don't have the guts to build something yourself? He spat in my face, and that was it. I threw him back, and this time, he hit the floor hard. His hands reached up to grab something, anything, and his eyes burned with rage. But as he tried to get up, he shouted, You think I won't burn this all down? If I can't have it, I'll make sure you lose everything, Daniel. That was when I knew. He wasn't just angry. He was dangerous. His obsession with the workshop, the inheritance, was toxic, and I had just become his target. I backed away from him, breathing heavily, trying to compose myself. Get out of my shop, Ryan. You're not welcome here anymore. If you come near me or this place again, I'll get the authorities involved. Ryan's laugh was low, mocking. Go ahead, Daniel. Call the cops. You think that'll stop me? I don't need your approval. I'll take what's mine, one way or another. And then, just like that, he turned and stormed out. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, as I watched him disappear through the front door. For the next few days, I kept expecting him to show up again, but nothing happened. The shop felt eerily quiet. I kept working, focused on the cars, the business, and my future, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get worse. Ryan had crossed a line, and now I had no idea what lengths he'd go to get what he wanted. Later that week, I filed a police report for simple assault. They couldn't do much at the time. Ryan hadn't physically damaged anything, and there were no witnesses, but I knew things were escalating. I wasn't going to just sit back and let him tear everything apart. I couldn't. The next day, I hired a security team to patrol the shop. I didn't know what Ryan might do next, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. What I did know was that I had to prepare for the worst. As the days dragged on, the feeling of unease hung over me, but I couldn't afford to let it break my focus. I had a business to run, and I wasn't going to let my brother ruin that, no matter what it took. It was one of those nights where the shop was unusually quiet. I had just finished closing up and was walking through the workshop, double-checking the locks on the doors and windows. Miguel had already left, and the rest of the staff had gone home. The overhead lights cast long shadows on the concrete floor, and the smell of gasoline and motor oil lingered in the air, familiar and comforting. I was about to head out the door when I heard a faint noise from the back of the building. It wasn't much, just a slight sound, but enough to stop me in my tracks. My instincts kicked in, and I immediately went toward the noise, heart pounding in my chest. The back door was slightly ajar, the faintest sliver of light spilling through the gap. I stepped closer, hesitant but curious. Was it just the wind? A mistake? Or was someone really here? Before I could make it to the door, I heard a loud bang from the other side, followed by the distinct sound of something spilling. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I didn't wait any longer. I ran to the door, bursting into the alley behind the shop. What I saw froze me in place. The side of the building was engulfed in flames. The fire was small at first, but the heat from the flames spread quickly, licking at the walls, the garage door, the stacks of tools and materials stacked nearby. The fire was so sudden, so violent, that it felt like an explosion. Panic surged through me as I tried to process what was happening. The heat was unbearable, and the smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe. I stumbled backward, my legs weak beneath me as I fumbled for my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911, my voice panicked and hoarse when the operator picked up. Fire, at my business, the garage, it's burning down. I screamed into the phone. Stay on the line, the operator said calmly, but I could barely focus. My thoughts raced, and I could hardly hear anything over the roar of the flames. My chest tightened as I looked at the fire. The workshop I had worked so hard to build, the one that was finally starting to take off, was burning to the ground. And deep down, I knew exactly who was behind it. Ryan. It was too much of a coincidence. The threats he'd made, the way he'd stormed into the shop, the way he'd refused to accept anything but what he felt entitled to. It all made sense now. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This was him taking revenge. I ran toward the building, coughing from the smoke that was thick in the air, but I could already feel the heat beginning to overwhelm me. The fire was spreading too fast for me to do anything. I pulled back, my heart racing as I waited for the fire trucks. I could hear sirens in the distance, but it felt like hours before they finally arrived. They worked quickly, the fire hoses blasting water to douse the flames, but the damage was done. The back of the building had collapsed in on itself, charred and smoking. The garage doors were warped, and the tools and cars inside were gone. My investment, my future, reduced to ashes in a matter of minutes. I watched, helpless, as the firemen worked to contain the blaze. When they finally declared it safe enough to enter, I made my way into the wreckage, my stomach turning as I surveyed the damage. The walls were blackened, and the equipment I had bought with my inheritance was either destroyed or ruined. My cars, the ones I had been working on, were melted heaps of metal. The Mustang restoration I had been so proud of was barely recognizable. It was gone. I stood there, numb, as the firemen continued to comb through the wreckage. A part of me wanted to collapse, to give in to the despair that was clawing at me, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. I knew who did this. And as much as I wanted to keep my cool, as much as I tried to convince myself it was just an accident, I knew Ryan was behind it. It was his message, his way of getting back at me for refusing to give him half of what was mine. It didn't take long for the investigators to start asking questions. I told them everything I knew, but they couldn't do much without concrete evidence. There were no cameras outside the building, and there was no proof Ryan was the one who set the fire, but I didn't need proof. I had seen the way he'd stormed into my shop, heard the threats he'd made. This was his doing, and he wouldn't get away with it. A few days later, the insurance company sent an adjuster to assess the damage, and as I signed the paperwork, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. Everything I had worked for was gone, and the one person who could have helped me, the one person who should have been on my side, was the one who had destroyed it all. I had always tried to protect him, tried to be the bigger person, but I couldn't anymore. Ryan had crossed a line, and there was no going back. When my parents arrived at the site, they didn't seem shocked, didn't seem like they even cared that I had lost everything. They asked how I was holding up, but it was clear from their faces that they didn't fully understand the weight of what had happened. They just wanted to know if the insurance would cover it, if I was going to rebuild, if I would let Ryan off the hook. But I couldn't let it go anymore. Not after everything. Daniel, my mom said quietly, as we stood in the middle of the charred remnants of the workshop. Maybe you should think about letting Ryan off the hook. He's going through a hard time. He needs your help. I looked at her, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. No, he doesn't need my help. He needs to face the consequences of his actions. And I'm done trying to fix things for him. And that was it. The final straw. I wasn't going to let Ryan destroy everything I had built. Not anymore. That night, I filed a report with the police, telling them about Ryan's threats, about what I suspected. They promised to investigate, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. They didn't have enough evidence to charge him with arson just yet, but I wasn't going to stop. I would get justice, even if it took every last ounce of energy I had. As I stood there, watching the fire smoldering in the distance, I realized that I couldn't let this be the end of me. I would rebuild. I would fight for what was mine, and I would make sure that Ryan, for once, paid for what he had done. And I would never let him win again. It wasn't long before things started to escalate further. A week after the fire, I received a call from Detective Reynolds, the officer handling the arson case. He sounded calm, professional, but there was something in his voice that made my stomach twist with anticipation. We've got some new information, he said. We've gathered some surveillance footage from a nearby gas station. Ryan and a friend of his, Mason, were seen buying fuel containers the night of the fire. And it looks like they used their credit cards. My heart dropped. I had known it all along, but hearing it from the police made it feel real. They had proof, hard evidence, that Ryan was involved. I felt a sick satisfaction rush over me. Finally, I was going to get the justice I deserved. The police had also tracked down some incriminating text messages, ones where Ryan and Mason talked about making sure Daniel gets the message and how this place won't matter if I can't have it. The messages were clear enough, and soon the authorities had a full case against him. I sat there in my apartment, watching the news coverage about the investigation, when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the police. Ryan Turner has been arrested. I could hardly believe it. I had waited so long for this moment, and now it had finally come. They had charged him with arson, conspiracy, and property destruction. The walls of guilt and blame that had been built between us for years were finally starting to crack. He would have to face the consequences of his actions. I was almost numb with a strange mix of anger and relief. It felt like the weight that had been pressing down on my chest for so long had finally been lifted. But that was short-lived. What came next would be harder than I had imagined. Ryan's arrest was all over the news by the next day. It wasn't exactly the kind of publicity I wanted, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. He was out on bail, but I knew he wasn't done with me. I could feel it. That night, I decided to visit him in jail. Not out of a sense of revenge, but because I needed closure. I needed to look him in the eye and hear him say something. Anything that made sense of all this. The visit was a blur of cold, sterile walls and the heavy scent of bleach. When I finally sat across from Ryan, behind the thick glass that separated us, I could see the smugness in his eyes, even though he was wearing the orange jumpsuit of an inmate. His hair was unkempt, and there were bags under his eyes, but he still managed to give me that same arrogant smirk. "You actually showed up," he sneered, leaning back in his chair. "What? You think I'm going to beg you to bail me out? You can't break me, Dan." I took a deep breath, keeping my emotions in check. "I'm not here for that. I'm here because I want you to hear me, Ryan. You've destroyed everything, my business, our family, and you're still sitting there, acting like nothing's your fault." Ryan's eyes flickered, but he didn't seem fazed. "It's your fault, you know," he said, his voice low and angry. "You wouldn't help me, so I had to take it from you. You wouldn't share anything, so I took it all. You've been holding everything over my head for years, and you didn't even realize it." I felt my blood pressure rise, but I kept my voice steady. "I've never held anything over your head. I tried to help you, Ryan. I gave you everything I could, but you wasted it. You threw it all away because you thought you were entitled to it. You didn't even try to make something of yourself. You just expected everyone to give you what you wanted." Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "I'm not the one who built a life off other people's backs. You wouldn't even be here without me, Daniel. This business, the money, you think it's all yours? Guess what? It's family money, and I'm part of that family. I deserve my share." I slammed my palm against the glass. "No, you don't get to take what's mine just because you think you're entitled to it. You don't get to destroy everything I've worked for because you didn't want to do the work yourself." Ryan didn't respond. He just sat there, glaring at me. His eyes burned with resentment, but there was nothing else there. No remorse. No apology. Just a seething sense of injustice, like he truly believed he had been wronged. Do you think you can just walk away from this? I asked, leaning in, my voice low and steady. You think you'll get out of this, and everything will be fine? It won't. You're facing years in prison, Ryan. And when you get out, I'll make sure you never see another cent of what's mine. Ryan's face twisted in anger. You think you can just erase me from your life? From our life? You're nothing without me. You always were. I stood up, my hand clenched into a fist. You're wrong, Ryan. I never needed you. And I sure as hell don't need you now. With that, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. The weeks that followed were filled with legal battles. Ryan's trial was fast approaching, and the weight of everything that had happened began to settle over me. I had fought for so long to keep the peace, to be the good brother, to try to make things work. But now I was done. I had no choice but to stand my ground. I used my legal knowledge to fight back, preparing every piece of evidence, every document that proved Ryan's guilt. I wasn't going to let him destroy everything I had worked for. I wasn't going to let him walk away scot-free. But no matter how much I prepared, no matter how strong I tried to be, the reality of what had happened, of what Ryan had done, still haunted me. I had to face the truth. My brother, the person I had once cared about, had turned into someone I couldn't even recognize. The day of his trial came, and I was ready. I would stand in that courtroom and fight for what was mine. And I would make sure Ryan paid for what he had done. The courtroom was filled with people, though it felt empty to me. My parents sat in the front row, looking uncomfortable, trying to avoid my gaze. Ryan's defense attorney, a smooth-talking man in a crisp suit, was sitting at the other table, reviewing papers as though this was just another case. But for me, this was everything. This was the moment that could finally end the chaos Ryan had caused in my life. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my legal team beside me, feeling the weight of the past few months bearing down on me. The fire, the broken family ties, the betrayal, it all led to this. As I looked around, my stomach twisted. I had spent so long trying to avoid confrontation, trying to keep my family together, but Ryan had forced my hand. Now, I was here, prepared to fight for everything I had built. The trial began with the prosecution laying out the case against Ryan. The evidence was clear. Surveillance footage showing Ryan and Mason buying fuel containers the night of the fire, Ryan's incriminating texts, and the witness statements from the police. The case was airtight. Then it was time for the defense to present their argument. Ryan's lawyer tried to spin the situation, claiming that Ryan had no intention of starting the fire. It was an accident, they said. The gas cans were for a harmless project. My blood boiled as I listened to the ridiculous defense. The lawyer even tried to discredit me, questioning my motivations, suggesting I was exaggerating Ryan's threats. But I knew the truth, and I had the evidence to prove it. When it was my turn to testify, I stood up, trying to keep my composure. The moment I walked to the witness stand, I could feel my knees shaking, but I ignored it. I wasn't here to be afraid. I was here to fight for what was mine. Mr. Turner, the prosecutor said, turning to me, please tell the court what happened after you opened your car restoration workshop. I took a deep breath, my hands gripping the edge of the stand. I started that workshop from nothing. It was built with my own money, my grandfather's inheritance. I invested everything I had into it. It was my future. It was everything I'd worked for. I paused, looking over at Ryan, who was sitting in the defendant's chair, eyes downcast. But I knew he was listening, trying to play the victim. It only fueled my anger. Ryan came to me asking for help. I continued. But it was never about just help. It was about control. When I wouldn't give him what he wanted, he made threats. He wanted half of my business. He wanted me to share everything I had built, and when I refused, he burned it all down. My voice cracked slightly as I spoke, but I held my ground. He destroyed everything. My business, my future, everything I've worked for. And the worst part is, he didn't care. He just wanted to take it. It wasn't about family. It wasn't about support. It was about him getting what he felt entitled to. The room was silent, and I could feel the weight of the words hanging in the air. The jury was watching me intently, and I knew this was my chance to make them understand. To show them the true depth of Ryan's betrayal. I'm not here for revenge, I added, my voice steady now. I'm here for justice. What he did can't be erased. He took something from me that I can never get back, and he needs to be held accountable for that. I finished my statement and sat back down, trying to steady my breathing. The room was still, and I could feel the eyes of the jury on me. This wasn't just about my workshop. It was about everything Ryan had taken from me. My trust, my family, my peace of mind. Ryan's lawyer tried to make one last-ditch effort to discredit me, but it was clear the case was slipping away from him. The facts were too solid, the evidence too overwhelming. The jury deliberated for hours, but I could already feel the weight of the decision. The next day, the judge called everyone back into the courtroom. I was tense, my stomach twisted in knots. My parents were sitting behind me, but they weren't speaking to me. I didn't care. It didn't matter anymore. When the verdict was read, the words felt like they were in slow motion. We, the jury, find the defendant, Ryan Turner, guilty on all charges: arson, conspiracy, and property destruction. The weight of the words hit me like a wave. He was guilty. Ryan was finally going to face the consequences of his actions. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. I didn't care about the noise. I didn't care about the whispers. "Well, you've certainly earned it," he said with a nod. "I'm happy to see you moving forward." "Appreciate it," I said, my voice a little thick with emotion. "You were a big part of making sure my brother paid for what he did. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to thank you enough for that." Reynolds gave me a small smile. "You don't need to thank me. You did all the hard work. I just gave you the tools to make it right." The moment was interrupted by the sound of laughter from across the room. I turned to see Miguel talking with a client who had just walked in, a man in a tailored suit with a sleek haircut. He was asking about some custom work we'd been doing on a vintage Corvette. I could see the positive energy in the room, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like it was built on someone else's terms. It was mine. I had built it, and I would continue to build it. As the evening wore on, I found myself at the center of it all, talking to old clients, meeting new ones, and just basking in the success of the night. But the biggest surprise came when Miguel, who had been with me through thick and thin, pulled me aside. "I've been thinking," Miguel said, his eyes serious, "and I want to offer you something." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "A stake in the business," he said, his words carefully measured. "I've been with you since day one. We've been through the fire, literally, and I want to help make this place bigger than we ever imagined. I want a real partnership." I stared at him for a long moment, trying to process what he was offering. Miguel wasn't just a mechanic. He was a friend, a business partner in every sense of the word. He had stuck by me when things were at their worst, and now he wanted to be a part of the future I was building. "You're serious?" I asked, a hint of surprise in my voice. "Absolutely," he said. "I want to invest, both financially and with my skills. You've built something great here, Daniel. It's time to take it to the next level." I felt a deep sense of gratitude for Miguel. He wasn't just loyal, he believed in what I was doing. He saw something in this place that went beyond the money and the cars. And I knew, deep down, that this was exactly what I needed. "I can't thank you enough, man," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've been with me through everything. I wouldn't be here without you." Miguel smiled, clapping me on the back. "We're in this together, Daniel. Always have been." As we talked about the future of the business, plans for expansion, new ideas, and ways to bring in high-end clientele, a sense of calm washed over me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Later in the night, as the last of the guests trickled out and the lights dimmed, I took a moment to step outside, standing in the quiet street and looking up at the stars. I thought about everything that had brought me here, the years of hard work, the betrayal, the pain. But most of all, I thought about how far I had come. I wasn't the same person I had been when I walked into that first workshop all those years ago. I had learned the hard way that success didn't come from trying to please everyone. It came from believing in yourself and sticking to your vision, no matter how many people tried to tear you down. The night ended with a toast to new beginnings, to the future, to strength and resilience. And as I raised my glass, I knew that no matter what came next, I would never let anyone take what I had built again. The past was behind me, and the future was brighter than ever. The months that followed the grand reopening were a whirlwind. Business was booming. The new workshop was a success, and we had secured several high-profile clients who were eager to get their cars restored. Miguel and I were busier than ever, working long hours to keep up with demand. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt this alive, this in control. But despite the success, there was still a lingering weight on my shoulders. The old wounds with my family hadn't fully healed. I had severed ties with them after the intervention, and while it felt right at the time, there were moments when the silence was deafening. I had tried to block out the constant barrage of guilt-laden texts and messages, but they still found a way to creep into my mind. The turning point came one morning when I was sitting in the office, going over some financial reports, when I saw an envelope sitting on the desk. It was from Chloe, Ryan's ex-girlfriend. I froze, unsure of what to expect. The last time I had heard from her, she had been with Ryan, and I had nothing but bad memories of the time she spent with him. But this wasn't about Ryan anymore. It was about the aftermath. I tore open the envelope and pulled out a letter. "Daniel," it began. "I hope this letter finds you well. I know this may come as a surprise, but I've been meaning to reach out for a while now. First, I want to apologize for my part in everything that happened. I didn't know how bad things had gotten between you and Ryan. and I'm truly sorry for the role I played in that. I know I can't undo the past, but I want you to know that I'm trying to move forward, too. Also, I wanted to tell you something. I know Ryan hasn't exactly made things easy for you, but he has changed since he's been locked up. He's still reckless, still selfish, but I think he's realizing the weight of his actions. Anyway, I wanted you to know that I'm trying to raise our son, and I'd like to do it without the baggage of the past hanging over us. I'd love for you to meet him if you're open to it. I know this is a lot to ask, but I thought you might want to know. I stared at the letter for a long time. My mind raced. I didn't know what to make of it. Ryan had changed. Part of me felt like it was too little, too late. He had destroyed everything. And now, out of nowhere, Chloe was asking me to meet his son, to put all of that behind me. I felt conflicted. I didn't want to keep holding on to the anger that had defined my relationship with Ryan for so long, but it wasn't easy to let go. Not after everything he had done. I knew that. But maybe, just maybe, meeting his son wouldn't be such a bad thing. Maybe it would help me close a chapter that had never really been finished. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to think. Instead, I focused on what I could control, the business. It was my life now, and I was finally seeing the fruits of my labor. The workshop was thriving, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. A couple of weeks later, as I was locking up for the night, I received another text. This one was from Chloe again, but it was shorter, simpler. I understand if you're not ready to meet him, but I think it might help both of us, and if you ever change your mind, I'll be here. Take care of yourself, Daniel. I sat back in my office chair, staring at the message. I didn't reply, not yet. There was still too much uncertainty, too much hurt to resolve in just a few words. But something shifted in me. I wasn't the same person I had been when I walked away from my family. I had found strength in standing up for myself, in building something that was mine. That was what mattered now. I had earned the right to move forward, and it was time to take the next step. A few days later, as I was taking a break, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mom. I had been avoiding her calls for months, but there was something about the way the message was worded that made me hesitate before ignoring it. Daniel, we've been trying to reach you. I know you're upset, and I understand why. But your father and I are getting older, and we wanted to see if you'd be willing to meet with us. We're not asking for anything. We just want to talk. Please, just consider it. My stomach churned as I read the message. Part of me wanted to delete it without even thinking twice, but another part of me was curious. Curious if they truly understood the pain they'd caused. Curious if there was anything left to salvage. I put the phone down, taking a deep breath. I wasn't ready to forgive them. Not yet. But maybe it was time to stop running from the past. Maybe it was time to finally confront the family that had never understood me. Later that day, I found myself driving to my parents' house, unsure of what I was about to walk into. My mind raced with all the things I wanted to say, things I had kept inside for so long. But when I walked through the front door and saw them sitting there, waiting for me, all of that anger melted away, leaving only exhaustion. Daniel, my mom said softly, her voice tentative. We've missed you. I know we've made mistakes, and I know we haven't been there for you the way we should have been. But we want to make it right. I looked at them, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about my parents. It was about me, about what I wanted, and about where I was going in life. I had come this far on my own, but maybe, just maybe, there was room for some healing. I've been thinking a lot, I said quietly, sitting down in front of them. And maybe we can start over. But I can't promise things will go back to the way they were. They both nodded, their eyes filled with sincerity. I don't need to go back to that, my dad said gruffly. I just want to try, Daniel. That's all. I looked at them, taking in the weight of what they were offering. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for me. I was ready to move forward, to find peace with the past. I'm not sure what comes next, I said, my voice calm. But I'm willing to try too. It wasn't a full reconciliation. It wasn't the perfect family reunion I had once imagined. But it was a start, a chance to rebuild, not just my business, but the relationships that mattered most. As I left their house that evening, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had faced the past, but I wasn't defined by it anymore. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to walk into it on my own terms. A few days later, I received another letter from Chloe, this time with a picture of Ryan's son. He was small, with big brown eyes and messy hair. A part of me softened. Maybe there was more to life than holding on to the anger. Maybe, just maybe, this could be another chance to let go. I stared at the picture for a long moment, then tucked it away in my drawer. It wasn't the end of my journey, but it was one step closer to the kind of peace I had been searching for all along. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally moving on, not just from my family, not just from Ryan, but from the person I used to be. And that felt like freedom.